Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, you're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else, not on the media, and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. Dan Proft, co-host of Chicago's Morning Answer, weekdays 5 to 9 a.m. on AM 560 with Amy Jacobson. And joining me as co-host on this program is Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, it seems like the state has finally figured out a way to reduce its $16 billion worth of unpaid bills that it owes to vendors and other service providers to the state. Just don't send the bills to the comptroller so she can't cut the checks. They just go away then.
Yeah. Dan, I thought we had a balanced budget. Don't we have a balanced budget? What happened to all that?
Well, I mean, this is a balanced budget, but it was a carryover.
Right.
These are carryover unpaid bills for years and years and years. I mean, obviously, as you know, we haven't had a truly balanced budget in nearly 2 decades. And so we just have more kind of fantasy budgets where we X out from consideration things like unfunded pension liabilities and the pension contributions that need to be made, as well as the
prior bills.
Rolling over of prior bills.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, prior bills are part of the expenses that have to be paid. If they're not in the budget, they need to be in the budget so that the people understand where we are fiscally. And, you know, all of this, and it's the 15 Republicans who voted for this tax increase to ostensibly balance the budget, and people taking credit that, look, now we're past this budget issue. That's all a smoke and mirrors play.
For more on this topic of the financial condition of the state and its various appendages, including the pension funds, we're pleased to be joined by Mark Lennon, the publisher of WirePoints.com, and an attorney and a financial services professional himself. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, Pat, thanks for having me back.
One of the pieces that you posted in WirePoints.com recently was about this matter I just referenced, unfunded pension liabilities and the continuing deterioration of funding of the state's 5 pension system. So where do we stand?
Another $17 billion in the hole for 1 year. That does not show up in those phony budgets that you talked about. That's what people got to understand. That's where the lion's share of the losses get stuffed and hidden, and that continues unabated. It's continued, obviously, through this stock market boom that we've been having.
Right.
We're not getting saved by that. And, in fact, it'll probably worsen now because we kick the can a little harder on those annual pension contributions. They're already insufficient to keep the pensions from deteriorating further. But with the new budget, those annual contributions will reduce still further.
Hey, Mark, the point you just made, I think, is just an astoundingly good one and something that people need to understand. The stock market is at, historic highs. And obviously, there's going to be some ebb and flow, but there's also a chance for a significant bubble burst like we saw in real estate, like we saw in tech. And if we can't get our pension obligations in line when the investments are supposed to be within the system are supposed to be doing extraordinarily historically well, what happens to being able to do that when if a crash occurs?
Oh, that's just throwing more dirt on top of the grave. These things are doomed already. Keep in mind that these are so badly underfunded. Chicago's pensions, 4 pensions, are in aggregate only 21% funded. So even if the stock market does well, they're just not, the assets just aren't there to perform, or even underperform, by the way. And by the way, what's there is increasingly having to be invested not in the stock market but in bonds because they have to meet short-term obligations. So it's short-term money, right? Because they have to meet the retirees that are retiring now, so it's bleeding out. Well, that would bonds go down when the stock market goes up as interest rates rise. So it would really compound the problem. It would just turn a disaster into a humanitarian crisis for pensioners as well. It's been saying for a long time, we're going to shift from gluttony to hardship in many cases pretty rapidly.
Well, and I should make note, I mentioned the 5 state pension systems, but this report from the Illinois Department of Insurance, 671 state and local pension systems in throughout Illinois is what we're referencing with the worsening by $17 billion of the unfunded liability. And so what about locally, too? Because you mentioned Chicago, but I think there's a little bit of ignorance combined with willful blindness in smaller municipalities around the state about the status of their police and fire pension funds. We recently had Mattoon discontinue its ambulance service to try and come up with the cash it needed to make a payment for local first responder pensions to keep pace, if you will. And it seems like Chicago's not the only one that at the local level is not keeping pace.
Oh, absolutely. In aggregate, on average, those 671 pensions are only about 50% funded. That's beyond retrievable. They're not going to recover if they're that bad. The only ones that are going to recover are, maybe there are some pensions that are maybe 60% funded in very wealthy communities that where the taxpayers could write a check and make it up. That is a very small minority. But anybody out there who wants to look at their local pension, this is the best data that's now out there. It's linked on my website. It's a state report that just came out, and it captures the data from all 671 pensions, although the data is about a year lagged in there.
Mark, this strikes me as sort of the feeling that, I get, I'm almost 50 years old, I'm 48, almost 49 years old, and I think, well, I'm going to die someday, but I'm not going to think about that today because it's inevitable, but I'm not going to think about it, right? Because how would I function? Dan talked about the willful blindness of people who run these systems, or even the pensioners. How do we convince these folks that, look, death is inevitable unless we do something to change it, and you're not going to have anything left? That, there seems to be this sort of blind spot, like Dan referenced, with respect to this process, and until everybody understands that and gets involved and puts pressure on people, there's no way to get out of this.
Well, one possibility is to start emphasizing this notion of intergenerational theft, because that's clearly what we're doing. This debt is being loaded on the next generation. And it's not just the pensions. We now have this new state bill to issue $6-7 billion in bonds to try to pay down those unpaid bills at the comptroller's office. Well, what we're doing is basically moving the bill from our MasterCard bill today to our kids' obligation. That's just that. We talk about providing them education. Well, the bill for that education, which is largely pension costs, is being put on those same kids. It's intergenerational theft.
Mark, you also had an op-ed this past week in Cranes. That's the anti-business Chicago Business Magazine.
Yes.
Pat, yeah.
Yes.
Why Chicago's new debt scheme is reckless, and you point out about the authorization in the recently passed budget implementation bill for cities and towns in Illinois to borrow in a new and exciting way. Describe that new and exciting way and the implications of it.
The concept is really pretty simple. You go down to your local bank and you'll say, give me a lower rate on a loan I want, and I will convey to you ownership of part of my future income. Well, you get a lower rate, but that would be reckless, and it would be illegal too. Well, the state made it illegal for the municipalities to do that, including the state. So the whole purpose of this is to make it bulletproof in bankruptcy. It's not uncommon for the municipalities right now to mortgage certain assets, but it's very suspect, and those liens get shot down often in bankruptcy. This will be bulletproof in bankruptcy. One of the ironies here is that some of the aldermen said, hey, is this like that parking meter deal we did where we gave away the assets? It's worse than that, because that deal is actually voidable in bankruptcy. It's a contract. It was not a property conveyance. This is a property conveyance. We're parting with it. Here's the
well, and when you say bulletproof, you mean bulletproof for the bondholders,
bulletproof for the bond,
not the taxpayers.
Right. We're conveying ownership of future tax revenue for 40 years to the bondholders. Here's the deal: we'll give you $3 billion now, and you have to give us ownership of $660,000 of income for 40 years. That comes to $26 billion over 40 years.
It's a good return.
That's the deal Chicago just signed off on.
Yeah, and they signed off on it, Mark, because 40 years, this goes back to my death comment. Everyone who just signed off of this, they'll be long gone when most of those interest payments are paid, and they're just looking at their current window, and that's all they care about.
That's right. That's it.
All right, he is Mark Lennon with more depressing financial news about the state of Illinois and all of its various units of government and leadership, financial leadership, such as it is at the state level. Mark Lennon, wirepoints.com is the website. You can read more about his analysis of the recent pension report as well as the new debt scheme that we were just discussing. Mark, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sorry to wreck your day. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.